This episode is sponsored by Linode. Do you need a Linux server for your latest creation? Then check them out. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit per second network connections, Intel E5 processors, and top-of-the-line hardware to run your servers on. It deploys Linux in seconds from a Linode cloud, and you can choose your Linux distribution and node location right from the manager. They have locations in Asia, North America, and Europe, and a sweet set of tools to make it easy to manage it. If the web interface isn't your thing, they also have an API and a command line. They also provide two-factor authentication, IPv6, DNS manager, plumbing, scaling, and everything else you would want. So get the most out of your Linux node by checking them out at linode.com or devchat.tv/linode. Hello and welcome to React Native Radio. This is episode 87. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today, as our special guest, we have Wes Bos. Welcome to the show, Wes.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And for anyone that doesn't already know who Wes is, if you're into JavaScript, you probably already kind of have heard his name or watched his courses. But maybe if you're new to React Native or coming from the native mobile world, Wes, do you mind giving us a quick intro of like what you're doing, like who you are, and kind of really, I'm really interested also briefly how you got into software development in general.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Wes. I'm a full stack JavaScript developer from Canada. And probably what most people know me from is that I create web development courses that help you get up to speed on various topics. So I've got, I try to keep like my courses like half free and half paid. So I've got stuff on Flexbox and CSS Grid and vanilla JavaScript. And then some of my paid ones are on, my biggest one is on React. It's called React for Beginners. And I've got some on ES6 and Node. And I'm working on a sort of an advanced React GraphQL one at the moment, which I'm pretty excited about. So that's sort of what I do. And then how did I get into software dev? That's a long time ago, but the short story is that I was really big into MySpace back in the day, and I would create t-shirt designs and band art and then MySpace designs to sort of match these t-shirt designs for all these bands that were like local hardcore bands. And that's turned into me loving CSS, and that sort of just unraveled into me just building websites and teaching myself how it works.
So why do you have such a passion for teaching? Because I noticed that kind of like you veered heavily in that space, in recent years. Were you doing consulting before that, or were you just always into like teaching?
Yeah, no, I've been, I was a consultant for probably about 10 years. I run my own company, working for all over the place, lots of big companies and lots of startups, basically doing WordPress, lots of JavaScript development, lots of Angular back in the day, React, and sort of over the last 5 years or so, I've been putting out YouTube tutorials and blogs, and I've sort of transitioned over to. I stumbled upon it just kind of by accident. You can. I have a whole podcast on my backstory on this, but I sort of stumbled into it by accident by just teaching a weekend workshop. And turns out that I really like teaching, and people really enjoy the way that I explain things and break it down and make things manageable and make it fun and look good and I don't know, all these different things. And it's kind of like a perfect fit for me because I just love new tech. And I love explaining how things work, and people seem to enjoy the way that I explain. So it's doing well.
So I'm interested in, this is kind of a personal thing that I've always wanted to ask you. You seem to really have really good designs and really well polished interfaces. Is that something you do, or do you pay someone to do that? And are you kind of like a stickler for the design? Do you kind of go back and polish it for a while before you release? Because it's always really well done.
Yeah, I do spend a lot of time polishing it, and it's just because I think that if you're going to be invested in learning something, you have to have pride in it, and it has to look good. Otherwise, you aren't as excited about what it is that you're building. Even if it has, you can learn React without making it look good at all. That's totally doable. But if you have some pride in the thing that you made, you put in that extra effort that is needed when learning these tough topics. So I do it all myself. I'm not I don't know, I call myself a designer, and that's what I was before, but I'm not a formally trained designer who can pontificate about white space or kerning or different types of fonts or something like that. But I don't know, I'm able to pull things together and make them look pretty good. So I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed I've never like really sold anything like as far as courses online, but I have sold like workshops that are in person, and I have React Native training, which is our website, and I have a couple of open source projects. And I really have noticed that if you can just kind of like spend a little extra time making whatever you're doing like look better than maybe it would if you just kind of just threw it out there. Like we spent a lot of time on React Native elements and our documentation. In fact, I think we spent more time on our documentation before the release than we did actually the code. And even though it's like it wasn't that sophisticated of a library, I think the fact that we made everything really easy to like consume, and we had everything laid out really well.
Yep.
We actually cared a lot about how everything looked. We did really well with it, and I think like a lot of people that are like putting out courses and just anything like representing themselves, if they really kind of try to go the extra mile, it'll pay off like exponentially.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's very attractive when you are looking at a couple different courses and one of them slaps a couple bootstrap classes on something, and then one of them does a totally custom design. People seem to like it, although it kind of bites me in the butt a little bit because sometimes people are a little bit sad that they don't get to see exactly how I wrote the CSS behind everything. Like I'm working on some new CSS content right now just because people are like, great, but I also want to see the like 15 hours of you designing and coding up this thing as well.
Right. Well, that's interesting. That's really cool to hear. I think a lot of people are going to like enjoy kind of learning about how you got into all this stuff. But really, like, we brought you on the show because this is a React Native podcast. But really, to be a React Native developer, you have to understand and know JavaScript pretty well. And I know that I've done a lot of training, a lot of teaching over the last year. A lot of the companies that I deal with are native like based companies in a sense that most of their applications are native. They're not JavaScript. So they're like iOS or they're Android, and they're now coming into this new paradigm of cross-platform with React Native. And one of the big stumbling blocks is the JavaScript language because of all of the changes that have happened over the last few years. The documentation is fragmented. They don't know where to go to learn. There's so much great stuff out there, but it's a matter of kind of like, boiling it down into, what are the best practices and what should people learn? And I guess like, we're going to kick off, I guess, this discussion. If you're kind of like a new JavaScript developer, or maybe you're a JavaScript developer and you're trying to up your skills, what should you know right now to kind of like be, not on the cutting edge, but really just up to date with what everything's going on. And then we'll talk about maybe like where we think the language is headed in the future.
Yeah. It's tough for new JavaScript developers because often people come to the language just wanting to build an app, especially they come from other languages, and it's kind of frustrating to be like, oh, you first have to learn your loops and that kind of like low level stuff. But I don't know, if you're coming from like another language, you obviously have to go through all the fundamentals of how the language works and all the different data structures that we have and whatnot. But I think specifically what is needed when you're coming to something like React is a lot of the new ES6 stuff that has been added to the language in the last couple of years, just because things like backticks and arrow functions and destructuring, those things are used so heavily in React development, and they make doing things in React so much easier than it previously would have been. So if there's like one area, obviously you have to get your fundamentals down pat first, but that's one area that I would specifically spend some time on.
Right. And all the documentation is also kind of written in ES6. And even in some of the classes that I have had JavaScript developers that haven't really stayed up to date. And we start writing some of the stuff and it's all just brand new. And it really is kind of all brand new in the JavaScript language, really. So it's understandable. But you have a course like ES6 for everyone. Is that right?
Yeah. It's called ES6 for everyone. It's at es6.io. it goes through all the new pieces of JavaScript, sort of just like anyone who already knows JavaScript, but just needs to get up to speed on the new stuff. That's exactly what it's for, because I do have often people email me being like, Wes, I spent 3 hours on this bug, and it turns out that I didn't know that JavaScript had backticks, and you were using backticks, and I thought they were single quotes. And just silly stuff like that, where it's like, I'm not an idiot. I'm an enterprise software developer. I just didn't know these things, and I just need to get up to speed quickly on it. So that's kind of why I put it together. ES6 is a massive, massive update to the language. And I actually since updated it for ES7, which is tiny, and ES8, which had a bunch of new stuff, specifically doing async 08. That's a sort of a game changer if you're doing any sort of complicated flow control in JavaScript.
So async await, that's been added to the spec for a new release. Is that out yet? So ES8, like when does ES8 release, or is it already out?
It's already out. So it's kind of confusing. You take 1 year off. So ES8 would be ES 2017. So that's all approved and shipped in every browser, and including Node. So that is part of the language now, and you can go about using it freely in all of your apps.
Awesome. Yeah, I love async await. It's interesting. I knew it was like a spec. I wasn't aware that it was already kind of part of the language. That's cool as hell. One of my favorite resources is a book by Kyle Simpson. It's called ES6 and Beyond, I think, and it's part of his You Don't Know JS series. And it's also a good pickup if you're looking to learn some ES6. And I think you can either buy the book, or you can maybe download it from his GitHub repo, and maybe like
you can read it right online.
Yeah, you can read it right online. So either way, that's kind of like my go-to. Like as I'm traveling, I just have that in my bag, and I've read it like 3 or 4 times, and I'm still finding little pieces here and there because, like you said, it's such a massive update. But it's all important stuff, and it does make writing JavaScript like a lot of fun. I really like using all that stuff. I'm wondering, like, do you know like what other, like, is there going to be another like bunch of changes? Like, are we going to see JavaScript continue to evolve the way we've seen it over the last three or 4 years?
We're never going to see something as big as ES6, because the reason why ES6 was so big is because for however many years the standards organization just couldn't agree, or couldn't get together, or whatever. Like it's hard work trying to talk with all the browsers and make sure you get the spec nailed down. So that's why ES6 was such a huge update. It included so much. But then ES7, like I'll tell you right now, ES7 had the exponential operator, which is times, and it had array.includes. That's it. So every year we're going to be getting, I guess, some new stuff to the language, but it will never be that catch your breath kind of thing that we've had with ES6.
Yeah, I think that's good to know and to keep in mind, because I guess someone like looking at ES6, seeing all these changes, they're like, oh my gosh, this all happened in 1 year. Like, will they continue to do this? And I guess that the answer to that is probably not. Yeah. So another thing, I guess this really only pertains to React in general, because if you're a React Native developer or you're developing for React VR, it's all kind of the same stuff. Like, what are some of the things that you think that people coming into React or React Native need to know out of the language? I know that you mentioned like the backticks, or the I forgot the exact name of those. But like, what are some other examples?
They're called template literals. What else? Let me pull up the list of things here, because it's funny how often, obviously, classes is something that we use quite a bit in React world ever since we moved away from React.create class. Again, like right now, we don't even, they're kind of half baked, and we have to use like static and class properties in order to get like really what we want. Where like, I don't know if you declare your state in the constructor, or if you put your state right in the class, but if you put your state and your prop types and all those things right in the class when you declare it, that's not even standard JavaScript yet. That's still being talked about, but they're kind of half baked, so people just went ahead with them.
Yeah, that's kind of confusing for me. Like some of the stuff that gets included with the Babel preset for React Native, but also for the create React app or whatever, like it's hard to, like, new developers coming in, like, is this JavaScript or is this kind of like something that they're just thinking about adding about JavaScript? Because like it's important to teach the difference, because then they may take that and like apply it somewhere else and it just doesn't work, and they're like, why this was working, why is it not working now?
Yeah. Or it'll get pulled out of the language. Like my first time I recorded my React series, I used decorators. And then decorators they still might make it in, but they were pulled back. It was almost a sure thing, and it got pulled back. So I don't know. Like I'm always a little bit dicey about using things in JavaScript that are not yet confirmed. Or stage 3. Stage 4 means it's going to make it. Stage 3 is you're probably going to make it. But yeah, it could be pulled back at any time, and then all of a sudden you're using this kind of non-standard JavaScript. But there's some other stuff that's coming to the language, or it has come in ES6, the spread and the rest operator, where you can declare a function that will capture either all of your arguments, or you can create arguments for your first second. If you want to capture the rest of them, you can use a rest, and then a spread is sort of the opposite when you're running a function. Symbols are pretty neat. Generators seemed pretty hot, but ever since we got async await, I've never had to use a generator since then, which is pretty good.
Right,
there's a whole bunch of really neat.
Cool. But like in real world, I just haven't had a lot of use case.
Yeah, I find that async await will makes it. I think the biggest ones that I use are arrow functions, because they have the ability to both do an implicit return, which means you don't have to type the word return in there. That's great for small little mapping and looping over items, and destructuring. And destructuring is the ability to declare multiple variables in a single line of code, rather than like if you're pulling properties off of an object and you want to put them in separate variables, you can do that very quickly with destructuring. Or if you have like you got a function that passes in props, and you got like props.people and props.items, you could just destructure those in the function into two variables called people and items, without having to do the whole const people equals props.people. You get the point, right?
Right. So, I guess as far as React is concerned, where, like, you seem to be doing a lot of stuff around React. Is that kind of like your framework of choice? And like, what do you think about the ecosystem right now and kind of where it may be headed?
Yeah. I before that I did Backbone, and then I did Angular for quite a while. But when I moved over to React, I sort of fell in love. I don't love everything about React. I think that some things are a little bit harder than they have to be. But I'm a big fan of it. I think that I'll stick with React. All of my own current stack is built on React, so there's not going to be moving away from it anytime soon. But I have been sort of looking over at Vue as well. Vue seems to solve a lot of the, I don't know, weird issues. I think it's like a little bit easier to get up and running with Vue. I haven't done a whole lot with Vue, but just from what I've seen, I definitely see why people would choose a Vue over React. And they also are working, what's the company? I think it's Alibaba is behind Vue, and they're sponsoring like a Vue native, where you kind of get the same idea as React native.
Yeah, that project I believe is called Weeks, WEEX, and yeah, it's pretty interesting. I would definitely check it out if you're listening to the show and you like React Native. Like you mentioned, it's kind of like the Vue version of React Native. I know I had done a talk about Weeks and a few other options to React Native at React Native EU, and I think the talk was called React Native Cross-Platform and Beyond, and I went over that and a few other ones. But I think at the time, like, their documentation was kind of not there yet, but it's been about 6 months, so I'm probably going to go back and check it out because it seems really promising. Vue to me is also kind of the contender, in my opinion, like in the future to React. It's going to, I think, gain more momentum and overtake Angular if it hasn't already. I know it's overtaken Angular in growth, but as far as like adoption, it seems to be more intuitive than Angular, the newer versions of Angular, at least in my opinion.
It kind of reminded me of the first time I ever tried Angular 1. I'm just like, oh, this is awesome, and like it's not overly complicated, and you get it, and
it just works.
There's not a lot of like Yeah, it just works, right? And there's not a lot of like gotchas that you have to know about it. React has a lot of gotchas, and that's fine. I know those gotchas now, and I can develop no problem in it. But for someone who's trying to get up to speed or bring a team up to speed, I definitely see why people like Vue.
So, like, what do you think about the future of like React as far as the API is concerned? I know there are going to be some changes between 16 and 17. So I know that they're deprecating component will mount and component will receive props. I believe maybe maybe not component will receive props. Anyway, they were deprecating a few lifecycle methods, and they're adding a new lifecycle method. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but it has something to do with replacing the component will, I guess you would say, lifecycle methods. But in general, like, do you like the direction? Like, I work with a lot of companies. I'm seeing massive adoption with React Native in particular. I know the data is showing that React is also growing, but I remember the same thing was going on with Angular just a few years ago. So it's kind of like I'm always keen to kind of hear people's opinions on where things are going, and maybe you can give us your opinion on that.
Yeah, I actually haven't looked into much of the new stuff. I did hear that will mount is going to be pulled away, and I think it is because people are abusing it. I myself have accidentally, the thing that I used to do is I would put Ajax calls in will mount, which apparently is a no. You should put them in did mount. So I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to say about that just because I haven't looked into it that much. I know that there's some really smart people that are trying to figure it out right now. And I usually wait until everything has been solidified before I get into it too much.
Right. Because all this stuff changes so much. I know like
there's some stuff for server rendering that is coming.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really found like a good use case for it. Like every time I hear people talk about it, it kind of goes over my head. I'm just like, but I'm not really a React web developer. But I'm always like curious, like, what's the point of server side? I understand it's kind of like the idea, like the first load is going to be much faster or something like that, right? But I'm wondering, like, why even use React if you're going to do server side rendering? You may as well just use like Node with some Vue templating, something. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons that you would want server rendering. The obvious ones are SEO, and if you want like Facebook to, like, let's say you're building like something like SoundCloud, and you want your metadata to be scraped by Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, then that will obviously be scraped, and you could build your entire app. But also, I think that a lot of people they just see React as like a templating language, and you build your entire app in it. And if you want parts of it to be rendered on the server, or you want other parts to be rendered in the client, or you want to just be like, you want it to pick up from the server to the client, then you just build it all in React. And it's amazing how if you stop thinking about React as the single page app, or like React is just somewhere where you pick up where the backend left off, and if you want to do something, you have to decide whether you want to do that front end or back end and whatnot. You just sort of think about like, this is my app. The entire thing is built in React, and these components can be used either on the server or on the front end. And really the only exception is if you want to do anything that involves like the user's authentication. I guess you can also do that on the server as well if you use cookies still.
Okay, that's
I'm
pretty
a big
good.
fan. Yeah,
that's interesting. Actually, you just kind of made a few points that I've never thought about. Like I always think of React as like a client side single page application framework. That's it. You know, that's kind of like what I think of it as when I think of it on the web. But I guess you're right. If you're going to be writing a server side application anyway, and you're already using React on the front end, and you can just add that back end. You can add it on the back end as well without a lot of extra overhead and doing something different. I guess that makes a lot of sense. And also, I was going to ask you, you have very successful like courses and stuff. How do you handle SEO if you're working in React? I'm just kind of curious. Or do you even do traditional SEO?
I don't really. Well, the funny thing is, if you all my course websites are they're either built in jQuery or just vanilla JavaScript, and they're server rendered. Just because React's not necessary there. They're just a single page, and like I built the entire system before React was even a thing. I was selling courses before React was actually a framework. So I guess that's how I handle it. Is I just server render and use either jQuery or vanilla JavaScript in that use case.
That's interesting. Yeah, because my website for React Native training is also jQuery and HTML because of the same thing. And I know how tough it is to get SEO right. And I was like, if I build a website and I'm selling React training, React Native training, and I build it in jQuery, like people are going to like look and find out and they're going to give me crap about it. But in reality, like no one cares at all. All that matters is people can find my website, and it actually now shows up really, really well on SEO. And I feel like you mentioned, there's just no reason to do that if you don't have to.
Yeah. And my whole backend is built in React. So if you're on the course viewer, you're watching a course, you skip videos, it's going to update the URL, change the video without reloading the page. That whole experience is built in React because that's where it makes sense. But it's not worth rewriting my entire stack just so that I can say that it's built in React. And also, I really don't feel like babysitting. React updates so quickly and things get deprecated so quickly that I don't necessarily feel like babysitting something that doesn't necessarily have to be done, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like a marketing site, the landing pages anyway. So it's kind of like, it's not an application, whereas the video portion might be dealt with more like a real application. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know I talk to a lot of developers now that I've gotten into the whole training and consulting, like, and writing thing, and they're interested in getting into that business as well, kind of like getting into training, getting into writing tutorials and all that stuff. You're probably the most successful person in the whole space that I know of, but I'm also only kind of like into the JavaScript space. I'm sure there's other people out there, but I'm kind of curious, do you have any kind of like tips to people that are listening that maybe want to also get into that space, in general, I guess?
Yeah. I think like the first thing is like, just do it. Like people are always asking me, how do I get started? Like you literally just record your screen and put it online and ask people for money. And that's how you do it. But obviously it's a lot more than that, because like, how do you get good at recording? There's this whole audio aspect to it. And then there's a whole, like, what do you build technical aspect to it? And then there's this massive marketing aspect to it. And like, how do you get it in front of people and make them want to do it? So everything that I do, and I guess the reason behind why my courses do so well is obviously good content. That's first and foremost, but content doesn't speak for itself. Like people think you build it, they will come. That's not true. There's a lot of really smart people out there building good stuff that get no eyeballs. So behind everything that I do is community and like reciprocity, meaning that like I give and give and give. I give lots of free courses. I help a lot of people online. I'm tweeting all day long. I just kind of involved in the community, and people seem to like that. And then I give away a lot of free courses. So about half the stuff that I do is totally free, no strings attached. And what happens is that people enjoy that free content and they feel grateful for it because it's helped them forward in their career. And when they want to learn something else, if I have a course about it, they're likely going to come over and join me in learning it. That's
a good point. Just kind of giving away a lot of free stuff and just actually not procrastinating and just getting down and doing it.
Yeah.
I think I've noticed the more content that I provide, like for free, as far as like, see, my model is not selling videos. It's more like getting leads to training, on-site training.
Yeah.
I think the more that I've done, like as far as like writing, like blog posts that are very detailed and like, useful at that moment, and also writing video or recording videos, like the more that I've given away for free, the more business I've gotten. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's funny how like people always ask me like what is your Facebook strategy and what does your funnel look like and all these things, and like that stuff works, of course, and that could get you an extra 5% sales. But like honestly, if you just like help people and give stuff away for free and just lay it out there and try to be genuinely useful to other people, the rest is going to follow.
So what about doing like speaking and stuff like that. Are you doing any of that? I know. I saw you mention. I saw you on Twitter responding to someone, or you said something about you wish that you could do more speaking, but only like your travel constraints or something like that were stopping you from doing that. Do you do any speaking right now?
Yeah, I do. I just sat down, like that tweet was because I sat down a couple of weeks ago and went through my email inbox. I had all kinds of invitations to different conferences. And I love it. I do speaking, and then I do like workshops. Either I go into a company and train up their staff, probably similar to how you do it, or I'll go into a conference and like the day before the conference we'll run a workshop. I love doing that. I think that there's no better way to learn than in person, and there's no better way for me to get feedback on how people are feeling about a certain topic than in person. So I really enjoy doing that. It's just I've got young kids, and creating a conference talk takes like a week or two. It's a lot of work to be able to do that when my I think the biggest impact that I can have is through my courses, just because my audience is like, I don't know how many people see a conference talk. Maybe on a good conference, maybe 400, 500. But if I release a course, like 100,000, 150,000 people can benefit from it. So I guess both financially and making an impact out there, those things are better for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I have two kids too, and traveling. I've been doing quite a bit of traveling over the last year, and I'm trying to wind it down a little bit this year. We've brought in someone to kind of help out on the West Coast. His name is Harry Tormey. He's kind of doing a lot of the training. And now that I've started with AWS, we're kind of, I'm going to be, not doing as much travel, thankfully.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess before we start wrapping it up, I know we spoke before we started recording about GraphQL.
Yeah.
You're working on something with GraphQL. I know that's a really hot topic. Do you want to go into that real quick? And also maybe just what you think about GraphQL.
Yeah. I don't have to plug my own stuff too much, we've done that already. But so I'm been a big fan of GraphQL in general. I know that you did another episode on this last time. But I think that it's really going to see big uptake in the next couple of years. And I also know that the GraphQL itself has I think the learning curve or the adoption curve to that is significant. It's really hard to switch from a REST API where it's kind of the Wild West of anything goes and you can just JSON back anything you want, to this very structured GraphQL where it requires very structured buy-in, both on the server as well as on the front end, right? There's a lot to it. So I was working with GraphQL for a while, and then they put out their sort of like open source version called Prisma. And then they have a server that sits on top of that called Yoga, which the whole stack it's amazing. I love it. It's a little bit to get set up, but once you're up and running with that specific stack, I think that it's gonna see big uptake.
So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, totally, I agree. I think last year and this year we're gonna see. I know we saw a lot of uptick last year. Mm-hmm. I think last year we saw a lot of people getting excited about it. I think this year we're gonna start seeing some abstractions that are gonna make getting into React Native easier. I think the problem last year was, there were great things like Apollo that kind of came around to ease that. I think what we're gonna see this year is a lot of tooling around GraphQL to kind of make that process even that much easier. And I bet by the beginning of next year, it's going to be kind of the de facto way to create a resource, especially for mobile. It makes quite a bit of sense, especially. So there's Prisma with GraphQL. They were kind of the first people out there to do a backend as a service, something like Firebase for GraphQL. And Prisma is interesting. I played around with it. You can basically spin up a GraphQL resource and application from the command line, and you have everything kind of wired up and ready to go. It was pretty nice. And then, of course, I'm going to plug AppSync, which is what I'm kind of working on at AWS. It's also a serverless GraphQL application, console where you can kind of spin up a GraphQL endpoint and kind of connect to it. I bet we're going to see more things out there like this over the next year. And it's going to be interesting to watch for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're kind of getting close on time. Is there anything you want to cover before we go ahead and wrap it up?
I don't think so. I'm happy to chat about anything you want, but yeah, I don't know. I think I'm good over here.
Okay, cool. So I think we'll go ahead and jump to the picks. So do you have any picks for this episode?
Yeah, I'll pick that's a song I picked on my own podcast, but it's I've just been so happy with it. I have one of those crappy new MacBook Pros that no one likes, and it's all USB-C. And I hate the laptop, but the one thing that I love about it is that I can finally plug in. I've got a 4K monitor, a secondary monitor, all kinds of recording USB equipment, a couple hard drives. I got all this gear, and I have this dock called the CalDigit TS3 Plus or something like that. I'm not sure what it is. And then this thing is awesome because you can plug all your gear into it, and then you have one cable that you plug into the laptop, and it will do your video, it'll do all your USB, and it will also charge it via one cable. So that sort of like one cable dream that I've been chasing my whole life is finally true.
Nice. So what's the name of that? Because I actually have two of those crappy MacBooks. One of them I actually really like because it has like all of the bells and whistles and it's super, super fast. And then I have another one that's kind of like the lower level one, and I feel like the performance isn't that great. But I'm kind of curious, what was the name of that again?
Yeah, so it's called the CalDigit TS3 It's called the Thunderbolt Station 3, and it looks like they released a TS3 Plus now. Of course, after a month after I buy it, it looks like you can throw a SD card in there and a couple other things. But it's great. It's got all your USB ports and Ethernet and HDMI or DisplayPort, everything you need. I'm very happy with it. I've had it for, I don't know, maybe 5 months now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Good to know. I'm sure a lot of people listening also have one of those, so that's good. That's a good pick. So I have two picks. One of them is a GraphQL post from Sasha Grief. He was on our show last week, and it's called 5 Common Problems in GraphQL Apps and How to Fix Them. It's pretty interesting, and it kind of goes through some pain points that you might have either coming into GraphQL as a newbie or kind of someone that's already been doing it. It's a really well put together post. The other pick I have is the React Native Training YouTube channel. If you haven't already subscribed, check it out. We're adding a lot of new content. We have stuff on React Native, of course, mainly, but we also have a lot of React stuff. So we talk about Redux, we talk about GraphQL, we talk about all kinds of stuff. So I'd appreciate you checking our YouTube channel out. I haven't really promoted it or talked about it much, but if you're interested, check it out. Well, Wes, it's been a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, that wraps up our episode of React Native Radio. Thanks for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.